Today, we talk about Notre Dame, World Heritage, trying to figure out how to do a podcast again. Welcome back. So you tell me first what you were thinking.
What I was thinking, it was partially triggered by Notre Dame and partially by and I connected it with the fire that burnt the museum in Brazil. I think it was Brazil about sometime in 2018. I think
Yes.
there was a fire in Brazil in an important cultural museum, and everything was lost, save for photos that people took and stuff like that. But on the management side, there wasn't. It appeared that there wasn't much to be salvaged, and people blamed more neglect than anything else for not just the fire and the loss. Then come Notre Dame, it was almost too big to fall, quote unquote.
Yeah. Right. It was. I think nobody, of course, expected Notre Dame to collapse like it did.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of not literally collapse, because it's still there, but when we were so I'm glad that you're asking me though.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we talked about when we were because I'm doing the internship, right? At, UNESCO. And one of the things that was talked about was the fact that a lot of the issues that a lot of World Heritage sites and just heritage sites in general have is that state parties are supposed to inform when they do construction, which that construction was never informed about, but it was happening because of the Olympics. Right? So the idea was that they were trying to make sure that Notre Dame was in a condition where many tourists would come, and it would a little bit fresher, right? On the roof.
So for me, it was. I looked at it from several perspectives. First of all, from the layman side of things, like the way it came down was kind of like in the proportions of fires that we hear about in the Middle Ages, about how some cathedral in London burnt down and there wasn't much they could do, but France is a relatively rich country, and it was I kind of thought it's something that they could get rid of quickly, but the fact that they managed to salvage some stuff, but what? Yeah, they managed to salvage some stuff, but there's still some complications that people can't really do much about. People can't do much to mitigate, so to say.
Yeah. Well, and there was, right? It's one of those things where, yes, I think the way you put it at the beginning was great, right? It was too big to fall. Since everybody had faith that everything was working just fine, nobody bothered to check whether the construction work, right, was doing something that was maybe over the top or too much.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's weird because you don't these are the type of things that you don't expect at all. Like pretty much everybody who lives here in France, my family, they're all saying this is incredible. We would never thought this would ever happen, ever.
Yeah, but yeah, it did. And
it did, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And it brought up several arguments. I tend to gravitate towards towards the argumentative side of some things. So like in this case, I saw there was so many people, millionaires and billionaires, coming up, and they want to donate all this cash to the cause,
right?
To repairing it, which on one hand is noble, but on the other hand, there's again the public side of it. Like France recently had the Yellow Vest, and I believe the protests still happen every now and then.
Yes.
And
no, they happen every Saturday.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So they happen every Saturday, and that means that there's a serious problem with income disparity in.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and yet you have some people.
France in general. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So that shows that there's a serious income disparity, and people in, I believe, the middle class tend to be really feeling the pinch of it. Yet it appears that there's another section of the population, the 1% or the 0.1%, who have oceans of money, and they're just like, okay, yeah, take these millions, which, yeah, so there's the public side of it, which is a bit, it looks controversial to me. Not that the people shouldn't, they can do what they want with their money, but on the other hand, society allowing so much money to go into a building that's almost 8 centuries old, compared to quote unquote real problems that people have, which
there's also the fact that France in general has the best way of putting it is to become rich in France is it's not like in America where there's an idea where, and I say idea, whether this is true or not is incredibly debatable. But in America, the idea is that if you work hard and you do everything right, you will earn your way to having a lot of money. In France, there's not that idea. To become rich in France is something that is very, very difficult, and usually there's almost sometimes an implied idea of you can't. It's you are essentially born into it or you marry into it. And so when all of a sudden these fairly rich people just dump a ton of money on Notre Dame, it looks really bad. Especially when people are arguing for tax equality.
Yeah, and I felt like your politicians made it worse by deciding to give. I was watching BBC or Al Jazeera, and they're talking about giving people tax rebates for donating. So I was thinking, if you're a wealthy person and you want to cut your tax, you can just balance your books and decide how much money you'll dump into Notre Dame, and it might end up favoring your books much more than society in general.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about it as a business thing, it's kind of brilliant, right? It's like if I was the government and I wanted to save money, the best way for me to save money is just to say, let's give you a tax rebate, even though that sounds terrible, and it is.
Yeah, but there's a genius in it because it will motivate people, appealing to our selfish side.
Yeah, absolutely.
That works much better than anybody's altruistic intentions.
Oh yeah. No, the more and more I do I do things in heritage, the more and more I realize that it's not about the heritage. Most of the for the professionals, it's about the heritage. But for everybody else, it's about the money.
So the time when I raised the issue in class, and one of the profs, and she never liked it when I introduced stuff that's not in the syllabus in class discussions. But I felt the need to do it. We were talking about nominations, and it was early in the first year of World Heritage Studies, and we were discussing the reasons why different forms of heritage have been introduced by UNESCO to accommodate other countries, especially like countries in the global south who might have other forms of heritage, and to increase their listings. But I did a simple. It might not have been scientific, but I did a simple comparison between the countries with the most heritage sites in the World Heritage List and the wealthiest countries in the world, and it was comparable. You could predict the number of sites a country has by the amount of wealth they have and how much they're willing to invest in heritage.
Yes, that is true. And if you actually look at the World Heritage Center, there are initiatives to do so, but not surprisingly, most of those initiatives revolve around having funds to do so.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking in one case in particular, there's a thing in UNESCO which is called Priority Africa. Are you at all familiar with it?
Unfortunately, I'm not. But continue.
So it's the idea that out of all the continents in the world, Africa is in the need. There should be a lot of investment in development in this area so that it can prosper on the same level as everyone else.
Yeah.
that is a very, very shorthandish way of explaining it. But the idea is that not only in Africa, but also in Asia and a lot of other less represented countries on the list, there's a lot of effort to improve the training and quality of the people who make those nominations. But at the same time, most of these people are dealing with actual issues with regards to development and or pretty much anything else other than the protection of heritage.
Yeah. Because the fires that have destroyed significant pieces of heritage in Brazil and in
Paris.
And in Paris. Yeah, so I was thinking that's just it. It seems to be more of a warning sign. Like there's other threats to heritage or world heritage that people still overlook. So I was wondering if other sites, I don't know, I haven't read up much on it, but I was wondering if other similar sites have been responding to such calamities by changing their security measures or their safety measures. Like if for example the museum fire in Brazil, if the museum fire in Brazil perhaps influenced or motivated other museums to find ways of, first of all, securing or digitizing whatever they have to make sure they have a backup of it.
Yeah.
Then perhaps I think somehow modernizing and making some of these structures safer collides with this authenticity and something else. Integrity.
Yeah, authenticity and integrity. That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, I was wondering if modernizing these sites and making them safer might collide with the concepts of authenticity and integrity. Like say for Notre Dame, instead of using wood, perhaps a more fire-resistant material.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
The reason why Notre Dame burned, from our understanding, is not because of the things that happen every day anyway.
Yeah.
It was a thing that happened extraordinarily. It's something that's not typical, which is why something happened, right?
Yeah.
Because of that, it brings up the question, right? Let's see where I was trying to go with this. So, all right, to answer the initial question, which is should they modernize, was most of the things that were built anyway for the purpose that were intended, they were built already quite well. There is no, essentially there was no any reason to change most of these things. Like, for example, the buildings that are built in Japan to prevent the really terrible damage that would happen during earthquakes, those things were already in place, right?
Yeah.
These things already happened in the past, and the modernizing was the problem.
So modernizing, so something that was supposed to enhance the structure actually made it worse.
Right, and it's actually it's one of the reasons why there's a newfound emphasis on, or newfound, I mean they've been doing it for a while now, where they've been using the techniques and the structures of the past to ensure the authenticity and also the integrity.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the engineers who built this stuff with the materials at hand were actually quite good.
Then something else I keep going back to Notre Dame because it's fresh in my mind. And and back to the issue of money. In French media or on the streets, he just woke up. Are people asking a question about ideally who should pay, or was a structure insured? Like,
right.
I've seen some write-ups about people saying the Catholic Church is really wealthy and why can't they just fund their thing or something like that? Like, has that question come up? Like, what if these donors who are giving you chunks of money were not there?
Yeah, I mean it's come up. And that leads to the question of who. It comes in the question that comes into place, right? Is then who is in charge of all this?
Yeah.
Because if there was no one in charge of the renovation and it just happened that something terrible happened, then whose fault is it, right?
I remember you mentioned something about nobody specific being responsible for the renovation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but that comes with anything. It's I think, and this is purely speculation on my part. I'm convinced that they thought the Notre Dame was going to have no problems because the people who were doing the work could do their job. I think that was the assumption. But in reality, that did not happen. And that's where the idea that it was so protected came into place. They were so convinced that it wasn't going to fail that it did.
And within, you are almost at the heart of UNESCO. And with the conversations that people are having, do you think Macron's 5-year window is practical?
Okay, so the important thing to say is that UNESCO as an organization is not actually anywhere near involved with any of the, so anything that Macron says or anything that a president says, we have little to no effect on how they put that.
Yeah.
So it's not one of our discussions, at least in my unit, since I'm in the Asia Pacific unit, not in the Europe and North America. So in that sense, we haven't really talked all that much about what the president may or may not have said, because it's not something that, it's not within our purview. But here's what's interesting though. The person who is in charge, so the Director General of UNESCO was actually, she is very much French government. And as a result, you can see that there was a lot of media attention that was given to the Director General at UNESCO.
Yeah.
One, because of course we're almost 30 minutes away from Notre Dame, and two, because she is French.
Yeah.
So if she didn't give that much attention to it, she would have looked bad.
True.
But if any other Director General, I guarantee you that they would have said their piece and they wouldn't have made it a big deal on the media. So I found that fascinating.
Yeah.
Because really there was a big emphasis on there was so many media things that were happening surrounding this event that I honestly couldn't believe it. Even though yes, it's important, but at the same time, right? Kathmandu, there's 7 monument sites essentially, and UNESCO gave it attention, but we did it through the normal process. No, I think this, in many ways, this was a very special case with regards to how UNESCO deals with things. Long story short, I think that his plan was not even on our radar within the offices. Maybe it's in the office, maybe within the radar of the Director General. But otherwise, no. I mean, we barely even talked about it, and it shouldn't be something that we talk about. Actually, it's something that should be examined when the state party tells UNESCO officially they'd like to have a mission sent to the site, which they won't do. I guarantee it.
So it's likely that they'll wait. If the state party doesn't follow the normal channel, though it's an extraordinary situation in itself.
Well, no. So this is a great topic.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about this. Pretty much anyone. Yeah. Everybody at UNESCO already knows, so it doesn't matter for them. According to the World Heritage Convention, when any major modifications or anything happens to a World Heritage site, it is within the the state party has essentially they are supposed to approach the World Heritage Center with the information about this change and then request whatever modification or whatever they need, which means in layman's terms that if a state party wants to change something, they cannot do it to the site until they've informed the committee the decision, and then they act on that decision.
So,
yes, continue.
Are you saying this in context of what happened to Ellie in Dresden?
Yes, actually. This is in context with any state of conservation report, any delisting, and any damage that happens to any site. So, in terms of the Dresden Elbe Valley nomination, right? That in that case, that was a case of they knew something was happening at the state party level.
Yeah.
But they didn't do anything about it because the public wasn't properly informed.
And
but yes, continue.
Do you think the public is properly informed about the convention side of things with respect to Notre Dame?
No.
So
quite frankly, no. And remember that Notre Dame is not the World Heritage Site. It's the banks of the Seine, which are the World Heritage. Which is to say, they might not know about the World Heritage or the function of how it works. Especially France actually is probably one of the countries that really doesn't, at a site level, really doesn't know about World Heritage.
Yeah.
And that's because most of the sites were inscribed way before any of the currents. But because they're in a pretty condition and nobody bothers to check.
So, do you think it might be relevant or necessary to re-educate the public or any other stakeholders on the state of other World Heritage sites in France, given that they were nominated so way back that they might be taken for granted today?
I mean, whether somebody might agree with me on that is some people might say it's not necessary. Some people might say it would be, but I think in general. So actually, this is important. One of the ways to do that is a process of World Heritage periodical reporting, which is it is essentially a progress report for the entire region. In that sense, the state bodies will then write their own progress reports on each site. Every site manager writes a progress report for each of their sites, and then they submit it to the World Heritage Center. World Heritage says, here's the report for our region, Europe, and that is what gets understanding what the convention's all about, because they're required to then fill in the.
But again, on the other hand, maybe for the rest of these sites, they might only gain public attention or come back to the forefront of public consciousness when there's a threat to them.
Right.
When there's a threat or when an incident takes place. Like,
right.
The only reason I know about the Bamiyan Buddhas is because the Taliban bombed them.
Right. And that's the thing, though. That's one of the biggest challenges is that you actually have a lot of state parties which will retroactively tell the World Heritage Center that, in fact, yes, we did plan this construction, or this did happen. What can we do to mitigate the damage?
Oh, but I guess that's baked into the whole concept of UNESCO.
Which part?
The reactionary part of it.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, yeah.
Like I was reading, I think you're the other person who bought the book by someone Hüfner.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Who will save UNESCO? Did you buy it? No, you didn't.
No, I didn't. I snatched it. I didn't.
Oh yeah. I thought you bought it. I happened to have a copy, and I was just looking at it again recently. And when he's introducing the book, he starts talking about how UNESCO came up as a reaction to the Second World War and the destruction of important sites, important monuments.
Yeah.
So a part of me thinks that the way people deal with monuments within the context of the World Heritage Convention, especially the public, will continue to be reactionary.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will definitely do on that. The convention, there are some small, which try to make it so that you react it, but in terms of how it would be able to legally, that's ridiculous. I don't even know how that would be possible. Because right, to be reactive, you have to enact change.
Yeah.
And in that sense, how can you make it so that UNESCO can enact change on a site level, no matter which?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have, once again, doesn't have the funding. So if it can't fund itself to do that, then what it do?
Not much.
Not much, right?
It can either advise or say, "We told you so."
Right. That's the only way they can. They just encourage the state parties to report in, and if they can, then wonderful. If not, then nothing will happen. That's it.
So back to the Seine, the banks of the Seine.
Yeah.
You're more familiar with it than I am. Do you think the fire affected it in any way? Affected its status as a heritage site in any way?
I think since the banks of the Seine. So if I remember the nomination correctly, or the OUV statement of OUV, the site, it covers a number of things, but Notre Dame is one of the 2 architectural masterpieces, and in that sense, it still has much of its architectural masterpieceness, I guess. Because it still has its windows, it still has the towers. There are still plenty of things which have been saved. So in that sense, as a whole nomination, I think it may have reduced its integrity a little bit, but not by much.
Okay. To know.
Yeah, I think I go ahead. Sorry.
I was operating on the mistaken belief that the cathedral itself was a site.
And I think a lot of people, when they see it on the news and it's talked in conjunction with World Heritage and they don't pay attention, will also think the same thing. So I only learned that because I did a search at work to see which site it was a part of, because I needed to. I mean, since I'm at the center pretty much every day, might as well just check.
Okay, let me break for a moment. I need to get to the door.
Yeah.
I'll be back in.
Yeah, no problem. Hello?